So just before I go ahead and start, I want to make a quick little disclaimer. Um, all the URLs that are put in here that you'll see are real examples found in shortened URLs like tiny URLs, bit.ly URLs, is good, whatever. And also the pictures in the presentation were also found by visiting URLs found through these URL shorteners. And this, yeah. So, except one, and you can pretty easily guess which. So I was noticing that a lot of security dudes have been shitting their pants lately over URL shorteners, and like, oh, well, clearly every criminal in the world must be using this for everything. Clearly URL shorteners are the end of the world. And I wasn't so sure how I felt about that and whether or not that was true. And I wanted to determine whether, what's actually going on. And what I found is pretty interesting, and what else I found is that there's a lot of sensitive stuff. So, who am I? It's not that important, but I'm a pen tester, trainer, researcher type dude for core security. That's about it. So, I already sort of got ahead of myself here, but, besides the, wanting to know are URL shorteners really being used for everything by attackers, I also want to know, do the URLs contain sensitive information? And on that note, can you get a URL removed from a URL shortener if you figure out, oh, well, this thing is sensitive, I need to take this down? What I also wanted to find out, just, what's behind it in general. Even if it's not the end of the world, even if if attackers aren't using this for everything they can think of, how are normal people using it? What are people actually shortening? And finally, because there are problems with URL shorteners, how can we fix those problems? Because there's no point in putting out a problem and saying, haha, here it is, without suggesting any sort of solution or any sort of next step. So I try to do that too. So the underlying issue is that when you produce a short URL, it's easily guessed. And there's also this issue of parasitic storage. Pretty much all the URL shorteners I've tested have this same property, that we'll talk about later. That actually wasn't what the bullet was about, though. Again, liver. I apologize. So the other thing is that people are still storing sensitive data in URLs, and this, like many things, should have been something we stopped years ago, but we haven't. And I've seen some really awful things in these URLs, and we'll talk about it, of course. But another big thing is authentication based on the knowledge of the URL. I can't tell you how many times I see this, that you're allowed to access something just because you know the URL for it, and whether that's some back-end script in some web application or whatever. It also applies here. You have things like Google Documents and Scribd documents, photo bucket images, things like that, where just knowing the URL means you're allowed to access it. So first, I want to talk a little bit about URL shorteners themselves before I talk about what was in them. There's a ridiculous number of them. Tiny URL, bit.ly is good. I could list them all day, but rather than list them, I will point you to urlshortener.org, which is actually a catalog of all the URL shorteners out there, because there are so goddamn many. It's incredible. They're very easy to make. It's just very simple operations. Pull in a variable, generate some token, some identifier for that, and then do redirection. It's very, very simple. And there's even drop-in URL shortener frameworks. So I think there's like a Drupal module or something like that, which will just allow you to turn your website into a URL shortener. So it's not hard to make your own URL shortener, and a lot of people are doing it. It's sort of hip with the kids. So So big people, big names are getting into this too. So you have goo.gl. The New York Times, before they decided, no, we're really just a print newspaper and we shouldn't be messing with this technology stuff, or whatever their reason for dropping their URL shortener was. They had a URL shortener of their own. Google, YouTube. I'm sure you can think of some other example, but you know, a lot of people have just got their own proprietary URL shorteners. So go.usa.gov, for instance, is an example of one of these. You can't use go.usa.gov unless you have a .gov or .mil email address, and you can't shorten any URL that doesn't end in .gov or .mil. So the bar is a little bit higher for abuse for this, because the assumption is that there's nobody malicious in the government or in the military, right? Which, I mean, clearly is not absolutely the case, but it's at least harder. I would imagine you'd find fewer attackers with access to a .gov or .mil email address and who can put something malicious on a .gov or .mil. So there is definitely a hurdle there. There's also Bieber.ly, which it was taken down, DMCA takedown notice after about 24 to 48 hours. But it puts a picture of Justin Bieber's face at the bottom of the page you're visiting through Bieber.ly. Why anybody would want to do this, I don't know. But it exists. So that tells you something about the variety of what's out there. Has anybody heard of Violet Blue? Yeah. So Violet Blue has her own shortener at vb.ly. Unless they've taken it down. I heard something about what does, I can't honestly remember what the LYTLD is. What country is that again? Libya, thank you. Yeah, so I know Libya was taking down certain URL shorteners. I read some news story about it, and they mentioned vb.ly, sort of half mentioned it. They were like, one that's some URL shortener that's sex positive, and that seems to be a word that Violet Blue really, really loves. It is all over vb.ly. And the funny thing is, it was made because Bitly will give you a warning when you visit some not safe for work item. It'll be like, hey, are you sure you want to visit this? You know, you might be at work. This might be gay porn or something like that. So they have that little warning, and I guess either Violet Blue had never used Bitly or had just heard or something, but her whole thing was like, oh, well, I don't want anybody censoring this. And Bitly will let you go ahead and go to that gay porn if you want, but it'll at least warn you about the gay porn. So, but it's for porn. That's the whole thing. Unfortunately, the results of what I pulled off of there are kind of boring, which saddens me a little bit, but it's just sort of all generic porn. So anyway, yeah, who knew? So next you have DAWs.me, and this was actually, I've heard, and I can't confirm, but I've heard that this was used as part of the WikiLeaks DDoS, WikiLeaks-related DDoS attacks launched by Anonymous. But it was put up as a proof of concept on the position, sort of like the position of control that you're in to some degree when you're using a URL shortener, because you could more or less serve up arbitrary content to whoever you want with a URL shortener, because you're not, you're relying on that shortener domain to actually get you the resources that you're looking for. Whereas DAWs.me did do that, much in the same way that Bieber.ly puts a picture of Justin Bieber's face on the page, just by wrapping it in an iframe. DAWs.me does the same thing, but rather than the Beeb, they put a little bit of code that just simply loads an image that you or particular URL that you specify over and over and over and over again in the browser. Now, if you have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people visiting a link, you're talking about a DDoS attack. Now, I mean, clearly with this iframe thing, you'll see the URL in the address bar, and it'll be a DAWs.me address, but you might not care, or you might not know what a URL is if you're a user. So that said, if you think about it, there's only really two reasons that somebody would want to put a web address through a URL shortener. One is because they want to share it. It's something that it's interesting and that they think other people will find interesting. Or it's something, it could be for utility, like it's breaking when they try to send it in an email. Or if you're an attacker, it can serve as a way of obfuscating your URL. And everybody's said that to death, so I'm sure there's some people groaning in the audience right now. Also, filter bypass. You know, let's say you're sending out some malware, you know, some link to some malware, and you don't have a domain name for some reason because you can't shell out the $10. And you're just sending a link with an IP address. Most mail filters will just stop that right in its place, but not with tinyURL. So if you take this URL that looks fishy, you know, and then put it through tinyURL, all of a sudden it's fine. It gets through the mail filters, which is an interesting property, but that's not really what this talk is about. But that's one of the reasons an attacker would use it. But either way, there's always going to be, theoretically, something interesting behind these links, or at least the nature of the links will be interesting. So in terms of the way that short URLs are produced from the long URLs, you have two basic schools of thought. You have hash-based and incremental. So with hash-based, you just have a proprietary hashing algorithm that has an output with, you know, a very limited character set and a very small bit width, and so you just hash whatever URL comes in and store that in the database with a long version. So this way, each URL is only stored once. You're not duplicating URLs, but there is the possibility of collisions. Those of you who are crypto nerds it's obvious that if you try to roll your own hashing algorithm, it's not going to work out too well. And if your whole point is not to try to avoid collisions, because it's to produce a short URL, and I'm sure these guys are not. Well, anyway, so there's the possibility of collisions. Now, I haven't been able to figure out any of the hashing algorithms that hash-based shorteners are using, so I wasn't able to launch any attacks. But we'll talk about some of the things that might enable, given a knowledge of the hashing algorithm. And then there's incremental. So let's say you go to is.gd, which, by the way, is incremental. If you generate two URLs, one is just going to be incremented from the last. Every URL is just incremented from the last short URL generated. So there's no rhyme or reason for translating a long URL into a short one, and you can store one URL multiple times. It's also a lot easier to guess these URLs once you know one valid one and the right character set. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So interesting attack possibilities. For hash-based URL shorteners, there's a possibility of URL poisoning. So if you know how to produce collisions in this hashing algorithm, you can produce some URL, attacker.com/whatever, and just have a whole bunch of junk that's ignored before you serve up your exploit or whatever have you. And depending on the way the URL shortener is made, if you can come up with a URL that will output to the same hash, it might just replace that particular URL. So let's say you wanted to attack some particular site, or at least the users of some particular site, and you saw that they're using some shortened link. Or let's say there's a celebrity who's shortened a link on Twitter and has, you know, tweeted it, and you figure out, oh, well, I can poison this. So you replace, you know, the picture of their dog in their purse with some sort of malware, with something totally unexpected, or possibly Goatse, or I don't know, something. Use your imagination, but not what Paris Hilton or whoever originally intended with their tweet. So, anywho, so incremental shorteners have an interesting property where if you submit a URL every 24 hours, you know, at some given time period, and keep track of them all, you can tell you can have a sort of dipstick to tell what range of URLs were produced in what day. So if you know that some particular company is passing data back and forth, but you don't know what it is, might be using short URLs. A little far-fetched, I know. This stuff is not generally applicable to some particular target. It's more opportunistic, but you can determine when certain URLs were shortened and just pull back for one particular day. So this is getting boring, but yeah. So the character set is generally base 62. Some are case insensitive. Some eliminate lookalike characters. So the point of this is just to say that they're really easy to guess for a couple different reasons. So there are certain shortcomings in the security of URL shorteners. Some just by nature, and some because they just aren't implementing it properly. But the implementation problems we'll talk about later. is.gd has a terms of service page that basically says third parties can guess these URLs. Don't put anything sensitive or secure in them. I don't know if anybody besides me has ever read that. So yeah, but you can't predict where somebody's going to be coming from, most likely. You can't predict the IP address that they'll be coming from, or the link, where the link is going to end up. And the other thing is, because you're shortening these URLs to a small character set within a small bit width, it's really easy to guess. And so the other thing is, you have some services that let you choose your own URL, and like choosing passwords, except nobody's ever told you don't pick a hard-to-guess URL. So, for instance, tinyurl.com, which is one of these sites, /link1 through link100 is incredibly densely populated because people are apparently really uncreative. So, the attack. Essentially what I did was to pull down a whole bunch of URLs from these URL shorteners, essentially just guessing each one either through random generation or through just incremental generation or through dictionary attacks. These URLs can be guessed, and you can just harvest the long URLs out of it. And then once you've done that, you can look through the URLs you've captured for interesting things. First thing you got to do is determine the character set and the length. So a quick Google search for any Bitly known Bitly sites, any known Bitly pages will give you a good idea of what Bitly is using for a character set, because you get a whole bunch of valid URIs. So you figure out the character set, the length, and then just guess. You can determine case sensitivity pretty easily just by trying to modify an existing URL and see if it still works when you change the case, or if it gives you something completely different. So yeah, one of the nice things is that we don't have to use GET requests for this. We can just use head requests because it's just a server header. So groovy stuff, because all the URL shorteners that I'm aware of use the location header redirection method as opposed to like a meta refresh or something. Here's some examples of pictures that were found behind short URLs. I have no idea why that guy has a pan flute made out of carrots, but I thought it was great, so I put it in. So PhotoBucket has this issue where if you know the URL of an image in PhotoBucket, you can see the image. It doesn't matter if you've got a private photo album or anything like that. As long as you know the URL or can guess the URL, you're all set. Now, one of the applications of this is to find one image in a photo bucket, and let's say it starts with DSCN, and then you have 4 numbers, just standard naming convention for Nikon digital cameras. So you can guess a whole bunch of other ones. By the way, this is irony because that guy has a shirt that says Yahoo Hack Day. I thought that was kind of amusing. So Google Documents also has a method whereby you can give out a URL, and nobody has to enter a password or anything like that. It's just supposed to be knowledge of the URL. There's some token in the URL that allows access to it. And since I now have the URL, I now have your data. So here is here's a spreadsheet that I found on Google Docs with full names and email addresses and phone numbers and home addresses of various people, about 50 different people, and it was some reunion that somebody was collecting data for. There's also a lot of really funny images you can find through tinyURL. So no one hates hula hoops, apparently. Another interesting thing that you might not know, URL shorteners don't have to shorten just HTTP and HTTPS protocol handler URLs. You also have a whole bunch of other things. Now, I see a lot. I see in these URLs, I see a lot of mail to links. And I assume people are just, using a URL shortener to shorten their mail to their email address so that spam bots can't just harvest that, which on the one hand is pretty clever, and on the other hand, I now have them. So I'm sure there's some spammer out there who's done this same thing and found these email addresses and is having a wonderful time with them. FTP links, there's a bunch of them. Now it gets more interesting when you think about the fact that these URLs, these domains, these IP addresses might not necessarily be on Google. Google might not even know about some of this stuff. And we'll talk about that in just a moment and why that's a very interesting thing. So I see a lot of file links for some reason, and it could be the sort of newbie web designer mistake because they are linking to some local resource on their, on their website on the internet, something like that. But to be honest, I can't figure out why somebody intelligent would shorten a file URL unless it was some sort of attack. But I haven't seen anything that would indicate an attack. That's not true. I've seen some things that are just bizarre, but I haven't figured anything out specifically with it. The other thing is you find a lot of wares. You find a lot of shared stuff, magnet links, ED2K links, a lot of rapid share links, mega upload, all that sort of thing. There's also a bunch of JavaScript protocol handlers that I've found. And again, I think some of that is exploit attempts, but I'm not aware of any browser that will actually redirect into JavaScript. Maybe some ancient browser does, and then they all learned that that's a terrible idea and fixed it. That said, there's also a webcal protocol handler, which is just for web calendars, so you can see when somebody does everything. That's fun. You can find some IRC channels that might not be publicly known. I actually found an insider trading ring through one of these URLs. Just some random vBulletin board. It was called like the Secret Trader Corner or something like that. It had a really dumb name. Anyway, so yeah, so interesting stuff leaks. Now, the one last thing that I wanted to mention on the protocol handler stuff is that iPhone OS, because I hate using the term iOS, that's already Cisco. iPhone OS applications, there's no real good way to do inter-process communication with iPhone OS applications. And so what you do have is these specific protocol handlers. There's quite a few iPhone OS applications that define their own protocol handlers, multiple protocol handlers, which can be triggered from things like Safari, or or maybe some sort of URL sent via SMS or MMS. Interestingly, MMS essentially just sends you a URL in an SMS, and your phone goes and fetches whatever's at that URL and then shows it to you. So it's kind of funny that you can force a phone to visit some random URL, but let's say that you found, this, because you can shorten these different handlers, you could put some bit.ly link in a tweet or something like that that points to a URL that exploits an iPhone OS application. So anywho, so fun stuff. But I've seen some bizarre protocol handlers, so I think some of that is going on. Here's something really interesting: parasitic storage. So there was a talk yesterday called "Printers Gone Wild," and it was all about using printers as file stores, more or less, in a parasitic way. Similarly, with tinyURL and other shortening services, basically you can just stick a base64 encoded blob into a fake URL and shorten it. And all of a sudden you have this little token that you can give to tinyURL or bit.ly or whatever you're using, and just get back this file in the location header. It's going to be a junk URL, and it's not going to, there's not going to be anything there, but the URL itself is the data. So, cool. It works really fantastically well. So well, in fact, that there's already several tools out there for doing this. TinyDisk, for instance, will build a virtual file system on top of tinyURL for use with, I think it's Unix-based systems. So groovy stuff. But there's like 4 or 5 tools that I've run across that do this parasitic storage stuff. Mario Vilas had a blog post about this sort of thing, and apparently 256K was the highest. It was the most amount of data that he tried putting into a URL before he gave up trying to find out how much it would actually take. So that's funny. So here's an interesting idea. Let's say you compromise some machine. Let's say it's in some sort of banking system. So you really want to be stealthy about infiltrating more malware to expand your access within that network. So you compromise that internal machine. You put some local exploit or rootkit or whatever you want in a tinyURL, not behind a tinyURL, but literally in. So shorten that malware. Go make a head request for that, which might not even, it might just be ignored because they figure there's no content coming down in head requests. Parse and decode that, and then win. In URL authentication, this is fun. So you have a couple different ways that you can do in URL authentication. So you have user:pass at whatever. RapidShare used to use that. I know because now I have some new working RapidShare accounts. Thank you, tinyURL. Session identifiers in URLs. Some people will make their sessions last freaking forever, and will put them in the URL, which is a terrible idea. But if this ends up on tinyURL, it's essentially public, as we're seeing. And so, yeah, so now I have your forever valid session ID even though you've logged out, possibly. People still put authentication in get variables. One example, one thing that I found was some old defunct torrent tracker website that put the username and password in the URL, just like how I'm showing you. Now, Mudkips is not the actual. Lol what and Mudkips are not the actual URLs, but the query string at least is the same. Just U equals something, P equals whatever, and sure enough, the credentials were still valid when I tried to log into the tracker directly. And then you have, like I said, an authentication by knowledge of the URL. So you have Scribd, for instance. Both Scribd and Google Docs have several different authentication methods you can use, but One of those is just the in URL, the knowledge of the URL as the authenticator, which means now I have your documents. I actually found a paper that was at the what do you call it? At the time unreleased, and so that was interesting. It was something about sewage though, so it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't huge, but it makes the point that people don't realize what they're putting out there. Which, by the way, if you shorten a link at all, even if you don't share that link anywhere, it becomes public. So, let's say you have some little private group where you share pictures of yourself naked with giraffes. Maybe that's just your thing. And so you have all these pictures of yourself naked with giraffes, and you don't want your mom to find out about it because she'll kill you. And so, you make it private, and, only your friends can see it who also like being naked with giraffes, strange enough. So you shorten all these URLs because let's say it's a Twitter account and you're either sending them via DM or something like that. But all these pictures are actually public now. If all you need is the URL, all these pictures are now public. So if you're using Image Shack or Photo Bucket or Facebook and you're storing the pictures there, they are essentially public now, which is funny. So one thing that I chose not to include in this presentation is some homemade porn that I found through tinyURL. So that's funny. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I do. I'll if you buy me a beer afterwards, I'll give you the URLs. Yeah. Sure, you got it. All right. So anywho, one weird thing I found is that lonely people sometimes talk to URL shorteners for whatever reason. So somebody either doesn't understand what this whole internet thing is about, but they're just typing away, and I feel bad because they're either like 12 or just I thought this was funny, so I put it in here. Vulnerabilities. Everybody really seems to like putting cross-site scripting proof of concepts behind tiny URLs. And I can understand why, because you have a lot of meta characters in there which might break, for instance, HTML or whatever, like you do. Sort of meant for that. So yeah. But people really seem to like putting these proof of concepts in there. And I've seen a lot of cross-site scripting attacks behind tiny URLs, but the funny thing is I've seen very few malicious ones. Here's an example of one that was just sort of a joke, which the majority of them are. A lot of them just do the alert XSS as well. But this one, this particular website was a competitor to the ASP.NET framework. And so when you visit this link, it creates an iframe that goes to ASP.NET, and it says, hey, you should have gone to ASP.NET. Okay. Funny, but we now have a zero-day cross-site scripting flaw in some website that we've maybe never even seen before. Cross-site request forgery seems pretty popular, though. One thing I found was a tiny URL on QABoss that pointed to QABoss. So QABoss is sort of like a beta test facilitator for mostly used by EA, or at least I'm not sure if they're still using them because there was actually a big breach. One of EA's games got leaked early because QABoss got hacked. Now, what I ran across in one tiny URL was a cross-site scripting / cross-site request forgery attack targeted at QABoss that would just add an administrative user with a given username and password. So, funny stuff. Also, on the official NBA fantasy basketball site, there's apparently a cross-site request forgery flaw, and you can see some JSON stuff there. And basically, all that does is to make some trades with different players. So somebody was trying to cheat at their fantasy basketball game, and Well done. Good on you. Um, so we can also find some other types of things. If we want, we can use basically any any Google Dork string that that uses the in URL modifier, because that's exactly what we have is URLs. So if you want to look for WordPress blogs or something like that, there's a lot of blog post sharing and news post sharing through tiny URLs. So if you want to find everything running WordPress, you could just grep through your grep through your URL archive for WP content, something like that. Now, also, here's one URL which has clearly got an SQL fragment in one of the get variables. So this is interesting because we know we can put arbitrary SQL in place of it, which means SQL injection, which is fun. So all of a sudden we've got an SQLi flaw here, or a file inclusion flaw as well. So you can find some pretty interesting things here. There's also lots of spam. The biggest use of these services, of URL shorteners, is spam, that I've seen anyway. So yeah. That said, I have not proven this, but my theory on this, because I saw something interesting with a lot of this spam. I saw many tiny URLs pointing to the exact same website. Now, there's two possible reasons for this. One, you're sending a different link to everybody, so it's harder to filter it based on the link. So makemoneyonline.com looks like a whole wide range of different URLs instead of just one. But the other thing is, when you get redirected, your browser will send a referrer header from that particular Twitter, or that particular tiny URL or other URL shortener link. So you have some amount of tracking. So you can you can generate 3 different tiny URLs for 3 different email addresses, where you don't know if these email addresses actually exist or not. Send the same link via different tiny URLs to 3 different people. Get the referrers, and then see who clicked on your link, even though you're not putting anything in the URL. So people can't remove it's less likely that people will remove the tracking stuff that goes along with your URL because you don't have any. Yeah, great. Another thing that I saw pretty frequently was multiple shortenings. There is no reason that you need to shorten a tiny URL with tiny URL. There's no point, unless you're trying to do some obfuscation. So despite the fact that all the unshorteners and things like that I've seen up to this point are too smart for this, will actually follow multiple redirections, there's got to be something interesting behind all that, you would think. There's no reason besides illicit ones that somebody would want to do this multiple shortening stuff. So if you're a malware analyst or something like that, and you're interested in, by the way, I will be releasing a tool that'll let you pull down URLs from various services. So that's going to go up on the Core Security blog after the talk, probably in another day or so, hopefully. So yeah, but if you're doing this, you're pulling down these URLs, and you're a malware analyst, and you're looking to see if you can find something buried in here, you might want to look at stuff that's shortened multiple times. So, do URLs have sensitive information in them? Yeah, absolutely. So, what can we do about this? It's not really easy to get your URL taken down. Actually, before I started into this whole business, I did a pen test, and I found a cross-site scripting flaw and wrote a quick little proof of concept, and sure enough, shortened it with tiny URL. And then I realized, well, oh crap, this is public, and I contacted tinyURL to ask them to take it down, and they told me, no, we're not going to take it down, even though this does, we understand that it poses a risk to this organization, which, great, thanks, tinyURL. But they don't want to take it down because they want maximum availability. They don't want their links to break. The other thing is they couldn't verify that I was actually the one who had made the URL, so they don't want to be, they don't want to be in the position where, somebody tries to trick them into breaking somebody else's link just by, saying, oh, it's malware, or oh, it's defamatory, or something like that. Because even with that sort of thing, it's still pretty hard to take it down, unless they think, basically unless it's malware, and they can see that it's malware, they won't take it down. So what can shorteners do to prevent this? Well, first, you have the problem of URL harvesting. So I was able to pull down about 15 million URLs in 5 hours. There's no reason that I should be able to do that. There's no throttling that's going on. There's no detection of multiple bad URLs being visited. That would be great for hash-based stuff because you only have like a 40% success rate with guessing randomly. That's about how popular the space is currently. So if you're seeing multiple URLs that don't resolve to anything in your tinyURL, you should probably, tell the person to fuck off for a couple minutes or something. Even if you just limit the rate at which somebody can pull down URLs from the same IP address, because I was not using any sort of proxy, just pulling down directly. So, if you see all that coming from the same IP address, why not just make it so you can only pull down one URL every 3 seconds? I think that's reasonable. And that really makes brute forcing this stuff out a pain in the ass. Because there's so much spam and things like that you need to wade through before you actually get to anything interesting. So you could be throttling, you could be doing lockouts. Another solution, although not a very good one because it sort of breaks the whole convenience thing that this is all about, is Trickly, which will do password-protected short URLs. So, I don't know, that's kind of cool. Yeah, didn't talk about the other things. Should probably talk about that before I move on. So, parasitic storage. I can't think of a good solution for this. I really can't. Any sort of validation you could do on the URL would be pointless because there's so much entropy. There's so much whatever that you could put in, and a base 64 blob is perfectly valid. If it's in a get variable at the end of a valid URL. So let's say you turn it into a Google search. So google.com/search $Q equals base 64 blob representing your file. And you just change your tool slightly to use that instead. And all of a sudden, you've got a completely valid URL that still contains your file. And I don't know that there's any way that you can really prevent that. And if there is, it's probably going to mean more overhead than you want in your URL shortener. So I can't think of a good solution. And if you can think of a good solution, please do tell me, because I just don't think there is one. Multiple shortenings. A lot of URL shorteners will actually protect against this already. Bitly, for instance, will not allow you to shorten a variety of links from a variety of different URL shorteners. Clearly there's plenty because of, there's a website devoted to cataloging these things, so Jesus. But still, the least you can do is prevent shortening links from your own site, which not all of them do. The big ones like Twitter and Bitly, they do. tinyURL and Bitly. Again, no mutant liver. So the other thing is attacks. You could probably, cross-site request forgery. I don't know. That's pretty hard to tell, just by looking at something, if it's a cross-site request forgery or just some random URL. But you can there's certain things that you can pick up on, like if you see a script tag, you could deny that URL either because the person is stupid enough to be using cross-site scripting sort of as a feature in their web application, or HTML injection as a feature, or it's an attack. Now, granted, any of you who are familiar with web application security knows that filtering out script is not enough, but it's at least a start. Cross-site scripting cheat sheet from RSnake, apply that to whatever URL you're looking at, see if any of that shows up. That's another hurdle. So as users of these services, we can make ourselves more secure by not shortening sensitive URLs. And part of that is knowing that there is this sensitive data. So as a developer of web applications, you can stop putting sensitive data in URLs like you should have years ago. So that would be nice. As a ordinary user, you can not take candy from internet strangers because, and also you have a variety of unshorteners. So you have, there's a Firefox add-on called Long URL Please, which will show you the long version of the URL as opposed to the short one right in your browser. You also have services like longurl.org where you can just put in a URL and have it lengthened for you. So that's fun too. So, ending stuff. So I took a look at the URLs and did some analysis, and I have some fun statistics. Your chances of being rickrolled through a tiny URL are 1 in 12,000. Not bad. Not bad. You have about a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting Goatse at the other end of your tiny URL. Yeah, all right. Goatse. I don't know. Nah, I don't know why we're clapping. Your chances, and this is kind of funny, are about 1 in 450 of getting a .exe file behind your tiny URL. Your chances of getting one of these various file format, music formats, MP3, WMA, OGG, FLAC, or M4A, about 1 in 290. Interestingly, out of like a sample set of 500,000, there was exactly 1 FLAC file and 0 OGG files. So I thought that was kind of funny. And a little sad. I like OGG. So your chances of finding an image are really good. Now this is just a straight, this analysis is just a straight out link to one of these files directly, not through some sort of middleman like Flickr or Facebook or TinyPic, for instance. So this doesn't include this doesn't even include services which will just embed the picture. So there's a lot of images as well. Also, the most shortened domains are Twitter and YouTube. That number was thrown off a little bit. That's not technically true based on my samples because there was some spammer who managed to put some like 10,000, 20,000 links to the same just domain, like makemoneyinSweden.com or enlargeyourbodyparts.com or something, I don't know. So that's about it. Are there any questions? Go ahead. Sure. Yeah, that actually is a good point. So the question is, can you use throttling to control parasitic storage as well? Possibly. So that would prevent you from uploading really ridiculously large files through a set of tiny URLs. Also, if you're using some sort of like something like TinyDisk, which just implements that virtual file system in tiny URLs, that would probably have some effect, but you couldn't prevent it entirely. Yes? Data URLs meaning what? Okay. Oh, of course. Right. So the question is, can you shorten data URLs? There's lots of URL shorteners which don't require you to use specific protocol handlers. You can use any protocol handler you want. So you could absolutely shorten a data URL. Any other questions?
The tool you're going to release, what exactly is that?
The tool, which is referred to as the URL enlarger, is essentially a tool for pulling down URLs from whatever shortener you want. You give it the name of the shortener, and then you give it some parameters for how to pull down URLs. It has 3 modes of operation. One is a random guess mode. You give it a length of the URI, the shortener, and the character set, and it just guesses randomly within that character set at that length. You also have an incremental mode, so you can give it 2 URLs and it will give you everything in between, so in the case of an incremental shortener. And then you also have a dictionary mode, so you can feed it a dictionary file and it will use each line in the file as a URI to be guessed at tinyURL or whatever you're trying to get URLs from. Go ahead.
How are they making money, or are they just doing what you're doing and taking a look at it?
That's a good question. So how are URL shorteners making money, or are they just harvesting URLs for nefarious purposes? I don't know. Yeah, that's a great point. So Bitly has a pay service, sort of like a premium. I can shorten as many URLs as I want, or something. I don't know what the benefit is. I have never considered paying for Bitly. Sorry? Yeah, traffic. Traffic stats and whatnot. So, but you can see that stuff just by adding like a plus sign to the end of a Bitly URL, I'm pretty sure. Either way, I'm honestly not sure how URL shorteners make money. Because they're not really advertising. Huh? Sure. I guess they might be. There's a possibility that URL shorteners are harvesting browser data, so they can see what kind of plugins people use, what kind of browsers they have, what OS, and that money could then that data could then be sold to advertisers. But do I specifically know how they're making money? No. So the question is, based on what I've seen, should we be afraid of shortened URLs? The answer is no. There's no reason that we should be more afraid of shortened URLs than just regular URLs. There's no attack that's made possible by URL shorteners that wasn't possible without them. So, it's, and that the other thing is that it's more spam. I haven't found a whole lot in terms of malicious stuff going on. I mean, if you don't think about the fact that there's EXEs being sent, but so I did a pen test recently, which involved sending malware to clients and seeing if they would actually open it. And one of the first people who saw it ended up sending an email to everybody else in the organization saying, don't open this, don't run this, this is malware, don't use this. The funny thing is that that everybody who actually got compromised, everybody who actually ran this Trojan, had clicked on it in the forwarded link. So, okay. So I think we have to worry more about people clicking on links in general, because it doesn't matter if it's a tiny URL or not. The people who are aware of the fact that tiny URLs might be dangerous already know to look out for that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think that's about it, unless there are more questions. Oh, you.
You mentioned Google and some of the other prediction providers that you found there.
Yeah.
There are lots of they're open source web-based software applications, so they use URL as the authentication.
Absolutely.
Have you tried any of this stuff against any of those applications to see how
Sorry, tried what to see if it would work?
tried like your tool?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've used them against a whole bunch. The URL shorteners, by and large, work the same way and use the same character set. Um, yeah, I've tried this with some pretty obscure ones, like vb.ly, for instance. I tried it with. Nothing much to note there. It's all porn, like you'd imagine. Um, but yeah. One interesting thing is that this attack also applies to other sites, like Pastebin, for instance. Also generates really short URIs, some easy to guess stuff. So I guess that's sort of the end of that's sort of the problem at the end of the day. Just easy to guess URLs, and a lack of authentication. Uh, looks like looks like people are filtering in for not me. So. Um, I'll give up the stage now. So, thank you.